Hello. This Sunday we are using the rereadings for Ascension Day, which was on Thursday. And these are my reflections on the readings for Ascension Day. Reading these readings again in these strange times of lockdown has made me reflect on that dynamic of presence and absence, which we've been thinking about actually over the last few weeks, as we've been thinking about passages from John's Gospel in which Jesus talks about being with us and being in us and being with God and being in God and God being in him. And it's led me to think about how we can be thinking about being together and being apart in the light of these reasons, in the light of these readings for this season. How have you kept in contact with people during lockdown? If you've got family nearby, maybe you've seen them outside waving through the window, or perhaps having a conversation from the end of the garden path. Maybe you've gone for a socially distanced walk with someone. For lots of people, the telephone is their lifeline, and they've been phoning family and friends. Other people have been using video conferencing tools such as WhatsApp or Skype, FaceTime or Zoom. At St Mary's, we've been experimenting with holding online services on Zoom so we can see each other, at least virtually. The ending of these conversations often makes me feel a bit sad. When you're talking to someone on the phone, you hear the other person's voice with its characteristic phrases and inflections and pauses, and you know that the other person is at the other end of the line and that you're linked together for the duration of the call. Then you put the phone down and they're gone. It's the same when we see the person on screen or of our phone or our tablet. There they are, not in person, but virtually. And we can see and respond to their facial expressions and their body language, as well as to what they say. And of course, they can also see us. But then, as at the end of a Zoom meeting, the screen goes blank and they disappear. When babies are very little, they don't know that things that they can't see or hear or smell or touch actually exist. When you go out of the room, it's as if you simply don't exist anymore. That's the reason that babies often cry if we put them down. As they get older, they gradually learn that you will come back and pick them up again. And eventually, that you still exist and you're still there, even if they can't see you. All babies love to play peekaboo, and this game of hiding and revelation is so important for their development because it helps them to learn what psychologists call object persistence. When the disciples thought that they'd lost everything in the desolation that followed the horror of the crucifixion, Jesus returned in the glory of the resurrection. They thought he was gone forever, but he burst out of the tomb and came among them alive. Now, after 40 days in which he has been mysteriously present, recognisable, living and breathing, eating and drinking, but also different, untouchable, maybe even unreachable. It is time for him to go again. As he did on the day of the resurrection, on that walk to Emmaus, he teaches them to see him in the scriptures. He gives them a great task to do, and he promises that they will be sent help, power from on high, to do it. Then he blesses them, and as at that supper at the inn at Emmaus, as he blesses them, he leaves. He withdraws from their sight and is carried up to heaven. It's always intrigued me that once Jesus has gone, the disciples aren't forlorn or shocked or grief-stricken. Instead, they return to Jerusalem with great joy and spend all their time in the temple blessing God. What joy can there be in Jesus' vanishing? Surely there's simply emptiness and vacancy and absence where there had been joy. But perhaps for once the disciples were wise. Perhaps they had learned during those 40 days since Jesus' return that, present or absent, he was always there. Perhaps they had begun to know that, just as in his resurrection, Jesus brought heaven to walk in the earth, so something of his presence would stay with them even in his apparent absence. In the telling of this story in the first chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, another of this week's readings, two men in white appear as Jesus is taken up, promising that he will return. And that is that great return which we look for at the end of all things. In the meantime, which is the time in which we're now living, Jesus' blessing continues. In a sense, it's a bit like the smile of the Cheshire Cat in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. That smile that hung in the air even after he disappeared. Jesus continues to be with us, to abide with us, even though we cannot see him. In his absence, we know that he is still there. The click as the telephone call ends does not mean that the person at the other end has vanished. The blank screen at the end of a video call is not the extinction of the person. At the moment, we are living in times of absence, when we cannot see in person so many of those we care about. But the love of those who love us carries on when we cannot see them. And we keep faith that one day, one longed for day, we will with great joy be again in their presence. Maybe in these times when we yearn so much for the presence of those we miss, we can learn from the joy of the disciples as they return to Jerusalem to wait for the gift of the Holy Spirit. We are witnesses to the world that what seems to be lost is not gone forever, and that the God whom we cannot see still holds his hand in blessing over us, holding all that we are and all that we love in his care until he comes again. Amen.